So, okay, recording, admit all. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Before we do, if you could all mute yourselves while Morgan is talking, and then we can certainly unmute for questions and whatnot. We're just letting a few more people in. Once everyone has joined, we will jump right in and get started with our program. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are going to jump right in. People may join as we are going along. But let's get started. Thank you all for coming. Just a few housekeeping details before Morgan begins his program. Please keep your microphones off during the time that Morgan is talking. Feel free, there will be plenty of time for conversation, for questions. If you think of a question and you'd like to drop it into the chat, by all means, please go ahead and do so. Or there will be time where, Morgan will open things up for conversation and you can use the raise a hand feature and we can have a conversation that way. So let me go ahead and introduce our speaker, and then I will turn everything over to him. So Morgan Talty, his debut collection grew out of a love of oral storytelling. He is a citizen of the Penobscot Indian Nation, and he's an assistant professor of English at the University of Maine at Orono. He's on the faculty at the Stone Coast MFA in Creative Writing program and the Institute of American Indian Arts, and he's a prose editor at the Massachusetts Review. Among his accolades, Night of the Living Res received Best Book of 2022 by the New York Times, Time, and NPR. So please join me in welcoming Morgan. And Morgan, I am going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Erica, those kind and generous words. It's always weird sitting there and somebody reads off your accolades. And so for that reason, I always like to, people whose books have come out and have been, quote, successful in some way, they receive all this praise and rightfully so, but you never get to see what some people really think about the book. I have, where is it? So my copy here, the one that I bring and read from, it has a blurb from Tommy Orange, who wrote the There, which is a knockout book. If you haven't read it, definitely read it. He said, there is so much brutal, raw, and beautiful power in these stories. Reading this book, I literally laughed and cried. I love looking at reviews of my book on Goodreads and Amazon, like not to feel good, but just to see who didn't like it and why. And I find it always really funny. One guy said, I call him Clyde. His name isn't Clyde. I don't even know what his username is, but he said, he said, reading this book, I neither laughed nor cried. I did yawn a few times. Others have called it disappointing. One person even went way out of their way to say that this was a book of stories. They said this is a book of stories and it was poorly marketed, that it was a book of stories and they should have done a better job at explaining that it was stories. So next time we'll have that be bigger if I do a story collection. So for those of you who haven't read the book, there's all this good praise about it, but then there's Clive, the woman who found it disappointing, and then the guy who was upset about something that I have no idea about. So there's an objective view for the book for you to take with you. I have all these tabs open, I'm like trying to like figure out what I'm doing here. But I'm so happy you all are here. I'm so happy Erica invited me to participate in this event and to be able to, talk about storytelling and talk about Night of the Living Res, and also talk about my next book, and my next book, which deals with blood quantum, which deals with, sense of belonging, which I think is a very very large topic right now that is beginning to be written about more in popular culture. And so, yeah, I hope you all enjoy this. So I'd love to start by just reading the opening story of my book, Night of the Living Res, which is called Burn. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to my she knows who she is. She is my advisee at UMO. I appreciate you showing up. So yeah, I'll read just the opening of my short story. So this is a story. This story is called Burn. Winter, and I walked the sidewalk at night along banks of hard snow. I'd come from Rab's apartment off the reservation. Rab, this white guy with a wide mouth and eyes that closed up when he laughed, sold pot. He was all no bullshit, too. I had asked for a gram, and after he weighed it and put it into a plastic baggie and held it out to me, I reached into my pants and jacket pockets, looking for the cash among the cigarette wrappers and pocket knife. And he didn't believe me as I acted the part and kept saying, shit, 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 it must have fell out on the walk over here. He shook his head, took the weed out of the baggie, and put it back into his mason jar. I ain't smoking you up, he said. And so then I said, fuck you, Rab. I really did lose the money. You'll see. Watch when I come back here in 30 minutes with the money I dropped. You feel stupid then. He shrugged a sorry, man, and I slammed his door shut as I left. At the bridge to the reservation, the river was still frozen, ice shining white blue under a full moon. The sidewalk on the bridge hadn't been shoveled since the last nor'easter crapped snow in November, and I walked in the boot prints everyone made who walked the walk to Overtown to get pot or catch the bus to wherever it was as Skeejans had to go, which wasn't anywhere because everything we needed, except pot, was on the res. Well, except Best Buy or Bed Bath & Beyond, but those natives who bought 4K Ultra DVDs or fresh white doilies had cars, wouldn't be taking the bus like Mira Fellis did each day to the methadone clinic. That was another thing the res didn't have, a methadone clinic. But we had sacred grounds where sweats and peyote ceremonies happened once a month. Except, since I had chosen to take methadone, I was ineligible to participate in native spiritual practice, according to the doc on the res. Natives damning natives. The roads on the res were quiet, trees bending under the weight of snow, and when I passed the frozen swamp, a voice moaned out. I stopped walking. Nothing, so I kept on going on the sparkling road until I heard it again. Who's that? I yelled. The moan came again. It was a man, somewhere in the swamp. I got closer, listening. There it was, a low and breathy noise, and with my cold ear I followed it. The swamp was frozen solid, the snow blown in piles, and so I slid over the ice looking for the source of the noise. Moonlight through bare tree limbs lit the swamp, and caught among the tree stumps and solid snow was a person sprawled out on the ground. He was trying to sit up but kept falling back, like he'd just done 1,000 crunches and was too sore to do just one more. It was Fellis. Fellis, I said, standing over him. He tried to sit up, but something pulled him back down. Fuck you, Fellis said. Help me. He groaned, shivered. He didn't say how to help him, so I had to squat down to get a better look. I flicked my lighter and his purple lip quivered. Hurry, he said. Phyllis, I said, I can't help you if I don't know what's the matter with you. My hair, he said. I looked at it with the lighter's flame. Holy, I said, and I laughed. Instead of the tight braid that shined, Phyllis's hair had come undone, and it was frozen into the snow. Get me out, Dee, he said. Dee, get me out. At first, I tried to pull the hair out from the snow, tried to chip the snow away, but his hair wouldn't come loose, so I yanked, and Phyllis screamed. Lift your head up, I said. I opened my pocket knife, and at the click of the blade, Phyllis spoke. Wait, he said. Don't cut it. What do you want me to do? I said. Tell the ice to let go? Phyllis spit. Go to my house and get boiling water, he said. I closed the pocket knife. Phyllis, I said, by the time I got back here, the water would be chilled. He was quiet, as if something walked around or among us. The ice cracked and echoed somewhere in the swamp. The moon shone bright, and I looked. There was nobody but us. I have to cut it, I told him. You ain't getting out if I don't. Phyllis asked if I had a cigarette, and when I told him no, he cursed. Fucking bullshit, fucking goddamn winter, what the fuck? I laughed. It ain't funny, D. Look, I said, you want me to cut my braid too? Phyllis took a deep breath and he coughed and gagged. No, he said, just cut it. I gotta get home. I'm sick. I opened the pocket knife again, grabbed his hair in a fistful, and cut. When I got through the last bit of hair, Phyllis rolled over away from where he'd been stuck. He rubbed his head like he just woke up. I helped him stand, and we slipped all over the ice on our way out of the swamp. Through dry heaves, Phyllis said he'd missed the bus this morning to the methadone clinic. No shit, I said, because I didn't see him on the bus or at the clinic. And he thought some booze would be good before he got sick from not having any methadone. He'd had a bit of booze left that afternoon when he decided to go see Rab to get some pot. And on the way, he'd stopped off in the swamp to feel the quiet that came with too much drinking. And when he plopped down in the snow, he dozed right off. When he woke up, his hair was frozen in the snow. I got him to his mom's, Beth's, where he still lived. He walked fine by himself to the door, but I walked with him up the steps. I never thought I'd scalp a fellow tribal member, I said. Fuck off, he said. He fumbled in his pocket for his house key. You want to smoke? I asked. Didn't you listen? He said. I didn't make it to Rab's. He unlocked the door. I'll go for you, I said. Give me the cash. Phyllis looked at me. 20 minutes, I said. I'll run there and back while you warm up your pretty bald head. He gave me $30, and I didn't ask where he got it from. Yesterday, he said he didn't have any money. 20 bag, Phyllis said. And stop at Jim's and get some tall boys and a bag of chips. Any kind of Humpty Dumpty chips. Too damn salty. Down Phyllis's driveway, I imagined the look on Rab's face when I gave him the money. What'd I tell you? How about that gram? D, Phyllis yelled. One more thing. Bring me my hair so we can burn it. Don't want spirits after us. We're damned anyway, I said. But I guess I'll get your hair. I kept going, wondering. Hair or pot first? Pot made the most sense. It was strange having to set the hair and ice down like a soaked mop on the counter at Jim's while I reached in my pocket for Phyllis's money. Jim, that old wood booger, would say, we don't take those anymore. I'd look him square in his sagging face and say, I'm not trading no hair, you old fucker. And I'd smack down on the counter a $10 bill for the tall boys and chips. With the change jingling in my pocket, I'd walk to Rab's and he'd say, get that hair out of here. It's dripping on my floor. And I'd have to plop the hair on the muddy white floor in the hallway while Rab re-weighed the same nugs he'd weighed earlier for me. No. I'd grab Phyllis's hair from the swamp on my way home. With Phyllis on his unmade bed, me on a torn beanbag in the corner, each of us with a tall boy in the pot smoke hazing gray of the room, we'd keep poking and squeezing the hair, waiting for it to dry, waiting to burn it. Thank you. This is one of those awkward moments where it's like, you don't hear anything from anybody, you know, you're like, thank you. And people are just like staring at you. So yeah, that's the opening of the story. I imagine everybody here has read the entire book. Like raise your hand if you have not read this book. Or like do like, okay, I'm on page 1. Okay, so let me see here. Raise your hand if you've not read this book. Okay, all right. Piper, Stan, I'm calling people out here. Who else? Alexandra, Michael, All right, and then other people have their videos off. All of you can leave. No, I'm just kidding. I asked that question simply just because I always like to contextualize the book a little bit. The book is a story collection, but it's also can be read as a novel. So in this story, we're introduced to the character D, and in the next story, In a Jar, which I'll read a little sliver from, we see David, who is a very young boy, maybe I don't know, 7, 8, 8-ish. And we meet him and his mom, and eventually his sister, who's about 10 years older, and his mom's new boyfriend, because mom had taken David and from a different state away from his father due to circumstances that are not clear, and they moved to the Penobscot reservation. And so we meet this family, and we have that David story, and then the story after that is a D story, and then after that is a David story, and then we have a D story, a David story, and then we have a D story and a D story, David story and a David story. I think that's all of them, or something like that. But D and David are the same person. It's not a spoiler by any means. Some people go into the book figuring it out right away. Others, they read 5 stories and they're finally like, oh, I get it. I see it. And we see this good-natured boy, David, in all of these stories where he's much younger, facing, witnessing, and so many things, and he's such a good-natured boy, but eventually, you're looking at him in the future when he's in his, mid to late 30s, and he's a drug addict. He's estranged from his mother. His sister's nowhere to be found. He's just lost. And for me, the central question that emerged from writing, for me, the central question of this book is for a reader, I think anyways, is what happened to this boy? That's what we're searching for. That's kind of the plot of this. And with novels, this is how I talk about novels. Novels, they have a momentous plot. They have this, I say it's like a power line. You can how we see the power lines as you're driving down a road, right? They're above ground. Interconnected story collections like mine have power lines too, but they're buried underneath, right? They're not the main focus. And that's how I've always sort of been able to make sense of those types of books. And there are a lot of interconnected story collections that end up being marketed as novels, for example. I imagine most people are familiar with the Ojibwe writer Louise Erdrich. She's won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, all of that stuff. I don't know if it was her first book. I think it might have been her first book, but it was Love Medicine. When that was originally published, it was marketed as stories. It said Love Medicine, stories. But if you go to buy it now, it says Love Medicine, a novel, because novels sell better than stories do. They always have, and I hope they don't continue to. I hope stories, someday overpower that. But that's just a sort of a quick rundown of this book. And, the book deals heavily with, and I want to be clear, this is the last thing I'll say, is the one thing I want to say is, this is a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of the Penobscot experience. This is not, these characters are not speaking for what it means to be Penobscot in the 21st century, even though the synopsis says that in order to captivate people into reading it, right? My hope is that one day somebody from, someone in the Wabanaki, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, Maliseet, Penobscot will write an antithesis to this book. That's how I see literature, as being in conversation, cordially, but also, argumentatively as well. I think that's the way it works. people were like, all right, he won't shut up. So with that, I will read just a very quick, really quick. Actually, first, before I even do that, do folks have any questions? I mean, I'm happy to answer a question or two before I go on to this other small piece I want to read. I see stuff in the chats, but I don't know. Oh, those aren't questions. Okay. Erica, do you see any questions,
No,
or there's
I'm
no raised
looking at the
hands?
chat. I don't see any raised hand, but again, if you do have a question, if you have a comment, by all means, drop it in the chat. I am paying attention to the chat, or, use the raise a hand feature and I will see that too. So.
Yeah, I literally, you can ask me anything and I will give you an honest answer. I swear to God.
I
All right,
actually do have a question.
Yeah.
So I would, you mentioned, in this first story, that the hair was going to be burned after you cut off his hair. Is
Yeah.
that what traditionally would happen if someone had to cut the hair?
Stop the video.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a Penobscot traditional way of disposing of the hair. I mean, hair is a very sacred for I say indigenous people, and that's true, but that it might be overgeneralizing because I'm not trying to speak for every tribe, but at least for Penobscot or Punawapskik, hair is sacred, and a lot of people who for example, when for us, if we have a long braid and we choose to grow our hair out and keep it braided, when a loved one passes, someone who is so dear to you, culturally, what you're supposed to do is to cut that off, to cut that braid off, and so there's that element to it, but then there's also the element of I'm not quite too sure why it is this way, but it may have to do with, I think, a lot of traditional stories surrounding hair, and I don't want to say like curses or things like creating like curses or whatnot, but in the second story, in a jar, they, spoiler alert, David finds a jar in very early on full of corn and hair and teeth, which my sister actually had found something like that on the Mohawk reservation, so I stole that from her. But my stepdad on the island, when he'd comb his hair out, and I used to actually, I don't comb my hair anymore. Like when it gets crazy, I just let it be crazy. But my mom and her boyfriend and myself, like every comb was picked clean and they would flush it down the toilet just so nobody could get it. I don't know. It was just like one of those things instilled in them. And so I still remember being not yelled at, but scolded for forgetting to flush the hair down the toilet. But yeah, burning it, I mean, I may have invented that, but perhaps that is one way of disposing it. Is essentially to get it, gone, right? To make it so it's not in somebody else's hands, really.
Okay, thanks.
Of course, yeah. Now I have to just find the other part I wanted to read. I hate PDFs because they don't like always find the right section. Okay, here we go. Okay, I got it. So this is actually from the second story. This is which is titled "In a Jar." So here we get a glimpse of David and his sister Paige, who has finally arrived and showed up, and then their grandmother shows up as well. But before that, Paige and her mother had gotten into a fight, and Mom in the story, she's never named, she's referred to as Mom, goes into her room and is is in there to get away from what had happened. And so the only other thing you need to know is that David dropped a red toy figurine behind the steps that lead up to the front door, because they were kind of like, the steps were pulled back a bit from the from that side of the house. That's the only other thing you need to know. So I'll pick up here. The door was open, and so Grammy came in. I hopped off the couch. "Hi, son," she said. I gave her a hug. Paige turned off the sink faucet and dried her hands. "When'd you get here, Duz?" Grammy said to Paige. "A little while ago," she told her. Grammy walked over the linoleum with her shoes on and gave Paige a hug that said, "It's nice to see you." "Where's your mom?" she asked. "She's not feeling well," Paige responded. Grammy looked up the hallway. "Something she ate," Paige said. Grammy said, "Mm-hmm." She stood in the doorway, and Paige asked if she wanted to sit down. "No, no," Grammy said. "I was coming to see if David wanted to go to the evening service at the church." She looked at me, and in looking at me, I was compelled to say yes. She was my Grammy after all. But I didn't want to go alone with her, not because of her, but because it was church. "I'll go if Paige goes," I said. Paige dropped her head and shoulders, shook her head. She went to her bedroom and changed. Grammy's car was a puttering two-door piece of rusted metal. I thought Paige's car was bad, but Grammy's was something else. The engine made this whining sound every few minutes, like a bomb siren. Her turn signals worked, but on the dashboard it didn't say if they were on or off. So sometimes she drove with her turn signal on for miles. Maybe she knew. Maybe she was messing with other drivers. Also, the radio turned on and off by itself. And after we drove in silence past the small health clinic and the large tin-looking community building in the tribal offices tucked behind thick pine trees and the tan brick school and the football field, we pulled into the church parking lot, and the radio kicked on and blared out Meredith Brooks's "Bitch." And Paige bobbed her head, telling Grammy to turn it up, but she flicked the radio off. "Michigan Asus," Grammy said, "this shitty thing." We got out of the car, and Grammy hurried in front of us. Paige walked by my side and whispered about guguks, evil spirits. "They follow Grammy around," she said to me. "That's why the radio turned on." I tried not to be scared, but I was. Paige always talked about guguks, and one reason why I never stayed at Grammy's house was because Paige said it was haunted. And when I told Mom that, she said the whole island was haunted, that years and years and years ago our people used this place as a graveyard, that even late at night she heard guguks tapping on the walls. Mom told me not to be scared. In the church, we took our seats, and I thumbed through the Bible in front of me. Other than that, I didn't pay attention to anything, just watch people here and there, some with their eyes closed, some open. I didn't think Paige was listening either. Her head was turned sideways, eyes half open, like the priest's word was putting her to sleep. After we'd lined up to receive the body of Christ, which I wasn't allowed to ingest and instead received a pat on the head from the priest because Mom hadn't had me baptized, we returned to our seats. Paige nudged me. Grammy watched, hand on her chest, as Paige broke her cracker in half and gave it to me. It dissolved in my mouth, and it tasted like a chalky cracker that had gotten wet and dried again, and had dried again. Paige saw the disgust in my face, and she whispered, "It's the best Jesus could do." "Jesus made this?" I said. Paige had her arms crossed. "I know, right?" Grammy told us to shut the heck up. Church dragged on. When we had to kneel, we knelt. When we had to sing, we sang. When we had to pray, we prayed. Grammy probably prayed for God to forgive Paige, and Paige probably prayed for a cigarette. Me, I prayed for the safe return of my alien figure in his red spacesuit. I still felt bad that he was all alone under those steps, buried in the cold mud, and I prayed that the change in seasons would turn him out to the surface, and I'd find him one day. Toward the end of the service, we knelt one last time, sang one more prayer, but I didn't pray for anything because I couldn't focus. I smelled a stinky piggity, a fart. I had my eyes cracked open, looking, and I felt Paige looking too. We made eye contact, and she leaned toward me. David, she whispered, and she pointed at the upholstered cushioned wood we knelt on. You ever wonder why they call this a pew? I puckered my lips, felt my face getting hot. I bit my tongue, using the pain to distract me from laughing. Grammy was looking at us, shaking her head, and it looked like she, too, was trying not to laugh. And when Paige saw Grammy's face, Paige let out a little croak of laughter, loud enough for the priest to hear, loud enough to turn heads, loud enough for the person who ripped one to know they were caught. Thank you. Again, total silence. I never know what happens. And I always have the PDF over the Zoom thing, like, so I can't see people's reactions. So that's like also another issue. Yeah,
I see some hands up.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna try and go in order. Lauren, I thought I saw that you had put a hand up. If you would like to, it's gone now though.
So I see a comment in there speaking about my approach to teaching. Is that the question? I see Lauren shape. Is it Lauren or
It's Lori,
Lorian?
but it's all
Lorian.
good. Yes.
Okay, Lorian. Okay, thank you. Oh yeah, I hear him screaming. All right. Poor little fella. So yeah, my approach to teaching. So I've been teaching. It's a great question. I've been teaching for I don't even know how long now. Probably since 2017, I think. So 6 years I've been teaching at the college level, and it wasn't until last year that I finally, because of my book and because of a lot of convincing from the English department, that they were able to hire me as an opportunity hire, which was great. So now I have a full-time faculty teaching tenure track job. But before that, it was all adjunct work, and if anyone is out there who is an adjunct, I'm sending my thoughts your way always. The adjunct life is a hard life. But so I taught at Husson. I taught at Bay Mills Community College, which is out in Michigan actually, and is online. I taught various workshops, and then I taught at no, I didn't teach at the MCC. Just a bunch of various places, and I always ended up teaching college composition because that's the course, like that's the core course that all freshmen need to take. And at first it was, I love writing and I love talking about writing, and I actually became very like interested in rhetoric, like the actual study of rhetoric, and thinking about how, because rhetoric, as I tell my students, is, the definition is like it literally the art of persuasion. Like anything that is written or oral, there is an element of persuasiveness there. You may not see it though, right? And the whole point is being able to like execute that persuasiveness so they buy into whatever text they're looking at. And I always give them random examples. I'm like, think about buying, a bookshelf that isn't put together from Walmart, and they give you a manual that tells you how to put it together, right? And they're like, all right, step one, right? And they show you how to do it and all this stuff. If you can get through that, then that piece has succeeded in what it attempted to do. But usually they don't, they fail, and you end up, not just throwing the thing away. So my approach to teaching has always been very multimodal. You know, we look at, you know, so many various types of writing, and when I say writing, I don't even just mean like books and essays and stuff. We look at tweets, we watch videos, you know, we, you know, look at TikToks, and we talk about, you know, so for college composition, we would talk about, I spent a great time talking about like the rhetorical situation, you know, purpose, audience, context, tone, and genre, and like these decisions we have to make when we're writing something. And you know, I just love talking about that stuff, and I can keep going. And it's fun to find cool, you know, cool videos, cool, you know, mini essays, you know, tweets, Instagram, you know, posts, you know, so like social media, like from social media and stuff. Like all of that is all of it like has elements of, has even the most basic elements of like an academic, you know, critically acclaimed paper, right? It's doing something. And so that's been that's sort of my approach, you know, is really trying to connect students are reading and writing more than ever in the history of human society. Really, and you know, they're constantly on social media, they're constantly doing all of these things, and so like academia has to do some, and is doing some ways to catch up in that regard of how writing is taught. So that, I mean, segues into that question of, you know, the challenges that I faced is like, you know, how do I teach this stuff? And I was very fortunate enough to be introduced to a text by somebody who is basically saying what I'm saying right now. You know, that you know, text, you know, every text is, you know, has these elements, like basically, you know, students are doing things in their writing. And when I say writing, it could be a text message, it could be a voicemail, it could be a written letter, it could be, you know, anything. Students are making use of purpose, context, genre, audience, all of those things. The only problem is they just can't recognize it. So that's the challenge, is getting them to see it, is getting them to be like, oh, I never thought that. Like they're doing it because they have access to being able to communicate in a written way that no generation before them has ever, really. So I hope that answers your question in a good way. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome. Are there other questions? What I was going to say was writers are thieves. Some writers are literal thieves. They like steal stuff, probably. But apparently my two cousins on my dad's side were at church, and somebody farted, and then one was 12, the other was like 8, and the 12-year-old was like, "Hey Kurt, you ever wonder why they call this a pew?" So I stole that material from them and had to put it in this story. But yeah, so that's sort of the dynamic between Paige and David and Grammy, who is just very Catholic and is just appalled by all of it. And I always, every time I go to, I've read in like maybe 6 or 7 churches, I think now, just because churches love to host events, you know, because they love to bring people in in not necessarily to indoctrinate them. Some maybe, but not, you know, in that way. But they like people there, and great seating arrangements always. And I went to a reading it was in Maine. I can't remember. It was in Maine. I can't remember where it was exactly, but I had an event at a bookstore, but too many people showed up, so they moved it to the church, which was literally just right across the street, basically. And I this is a great example about context. I am like walking down the middle section of the church between the sides of the pews. I don't know what that's called. And I go up front and I just look and I see this like little table with this beautiful bouquet of flowers and then just an 8x11 framed photograph of my face. And I was like, am I at my funeral? I was like, what is this? So yeah, don't do that. Don't scare an author like that. I was like, I don't even have a eulogy prepared at all. So yeah, I think we have time for one more question about Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for this question. I'm interested in the order of story, in the order of the stories. Did you write them separately over time and at some point realize they could be linked into a story, or more wrote them as a group from the beginning? Oh man, this is a long answer. Long answer, but I'll give you the rundown here. So I wrote before I went into my MFA program, I had several stories written from David's point of view. Actually, the very first story I ever wrote, not the very first story I ever wrote, but the very first story that ever featured David was actually Night of the Living Rez, which is the second to last story in the book. And I wrote that in 2015. And so I had that story. I had another story I wrote, Smokes Last, which is in the book. And then I had another story that didn't go in the book, but it ultimately it helped me find out how to write The Blessing Tobacco, which is one of the stories in the book. And so when I was in my MFA program, I was like, well, I'll write a story collection. I have all these stories. So I was like, how do I do that now? I was like, I have these 3 stories all told from David's point of view. And I noticed, one thing that stuck out was the chronology. He was 15, 16, 18. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll do like chronological order. So I wrote In a Jar. And I ended up writing about 15 stories told from David's point of view, and they all stood alone. And I whittled it down to the 10 best, or the ones that I thought were the best. And I looked at it and I was like, this sucks. This is a terrible book. Because the thing is with story collections is that there's 2 kinds of story collections. There are traditional story collections. Think of Raymond Carver, think of Karen Russell, think of Alice Munro. Geez, I'm leaving out so many others. But you pick those story collections up and you read, a story, and then in the next story, nothing from the previous story really matters at all in that one. You know what I mean? The thing that binds that traditional story collection most usually is just thematic elements, right? But every story is different. And you could start one story and you're like, I don't like this one, I'm gonna skip it, right? And you have your favorites. And then there's interconnected story collections where the characters are how I had written it. But the way I had it was it was so boring because it was just David in a different situation or in his family in a different situation at just different points in his life. And like reading it, you're just like, this is just the same story over and over again with just like a different problem. And so I was like, well, that's done. I'm done for. I'm cooked. I have to go do that. I'll go write something else. And I'd actually heard a story. A friend told me that he heard from somebody else about this non-native who actually found this native guy passed out in the snow with his hair frozen in the ice. So that actually really happened. Here I am again being a thief. And I tried to write it as an essay because I thought it was because the non-native actually ended up having had to cut the native's hair off, and I thought that was just like such a paradoxical, contradictory image, you know, in the 21st century, right? When we think about scalping, when we think about, you know, boarding schools and, you know, assimilation and all of that. And here we have this white, and back then it was all about, well, not the scalping part, but with like boarding schools and shaving their heads, like it was all about, you know, saving the Indian, or to quote General Pratt, who opened the Carlisle boarding school, you know, kill the Indian, save the man, or kill the Indian and save the child. But in this instance, it was like, it was legit, you know, like this guy had to cut his hair off, this native's hair off, to literally save him, right? And so I just found it so poignant, and I was like, I'm gonna write that story. So I wrote that story, and there's the line in the story that goes, there's a line in the story that goes, get me out, D, fella said, D, get me out. And I knew for rhythm purposes that I had to say the character's name, the main character's name. And I had written, all I had been writing were stories told from David's point of view. So my instinct was to say David. But I was like, no, this is not David. This is something different. I've moved on. That book has failed. That project failed. And so I finished this. So I put just the letter D in as a placeholder. To make a long story short, I finally realized I was being stupid, and I put 2 E's after the D, and I realized, I was like, wait a minute, this is David all grown up. And it turned the whole book around for me. And that's when I found that question, which was what happened. So then I started writing D and Fellis stories. And if you read the book, you'll notice that all of the David stories have a chronology to them, whereas the D and Fellis stories really don't. Like, they can really be moved around. Like there's no with, you know, with some changing, you know, you can move them around. The David ones, you can't. They have to stay in that order. Like they have to go from In a Jar to Night of the Living Rez. You could maybe switch 1 or 2 in the middle, but it might be a little difficult. But yeah, so I just wrote those again. I did it again. You know, I wrote, you know, 15, you know, D and Fellis stories. And then I was like, all right, now what do I do? So I whittled them down to 5 each, you know, 5 of the best ones I thought I had. And then I was like, well, now what do I do with it? And the central question was, you know, what happened, you know, how did David become D? And to get there, you know, I thought it would be good to build toward that culminating moment in Night of the Living Rez, which I won't spoil it. And I was like, well, we'll keep the reader on their toes. We'll do D, we'll do David, we'll do D, we'll do David, we'll do D, we'll do David, and until we get to that culminating moment. And so, yeah, I wrote them out of order. I wrote them out of order. I started over. I failed. It was a long process. And I hated it and I loved it at the same time. I hope that answers your question, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. It did. Thank you. That was really interesting.
Good, awesome. So yeah, I'd love to segue just into do some selfless selfless selling of my next book. I'm actually just gonna where is it? I'm gonna drop a link in here for people. So the link I just dropped brings you to my publisher's website, which has my next novel, which will be out on June 4th, 2024. It's called Fire Exit. I always link to Tin House because it gives people the choice of where they might want to. You can pre-order the book if you want to, or you can like wait and get it, or you can just not buy it at all. No, you have to buy it. But I always do the link here because some people preferred to shop at indie bookstores rather than, you know, big chains like BAM and Amazon and Barnes and Noble and stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff here, and it has a synopsis with it, but I'll read this the synopsis, which is kind of being changed. We're in the midst of changing it a bit. And so Fire Exit, I'll read just the synopsis, and I did not write the final paragraph of the synopsis, so please don't think I did that. So the opening description of the synopsis is actually part of the story, so it's italicized. Does she remember this day? Does she remember it at all? Does she know this history, this story her body holds secret from her? From the porch of his home, Charles Lamasway has watched the life he might have had unfold across the river on Maine's Penobscot Reservation. On the far bank, he caught brief moments of Roger and Mary raising their only child, Elizabeth, from the day she came home from the hospital to her early 20s. But there's always been something deeper and more dangerous than the river that divides him from this family and the rest of the tribal community. It's the secret that Elizabeth is his daughter, a secret Charles is no longer willing to keep. Now, it's been weeks since he's seen Elizabeth, and Charles is worried. As he attempts to hold on and care for what he can, his home and property, his alcoholic, quick-tempered, and big-hearted friend Bobby, and his mother, Louise, who is slipping ever deeper into dementia, he becomes increasingly haunted by his past. Forced to confront a lost childhood on the reservation, a love affair cut short, and the death of his beloved stepfather, Frederick, in a hunting accident, a death that he and Louise cannot agree where to lay the blame, Charles contends with questions he's long been afraid to ask. Is it his secret to share, and would his daughter want to know the truth? From award-winning author of Night of Living Res, Morgan Talty's debut novel, Fire Exit is a masterful and unforgettable story of family, legacy, bloodline, culture, and inheritance, and what, if anything, we owe one another. So one of the things we actually added to the synopsis, which isn't here, is it's fixed now. I don't have the copy version of it. Charles grew up non-native. He had no native blood in him, and his mother didn't either, but his mother married in to the tribe in, I want to say maybe the mid-60s, 1960s. And so Charles is non-native. He grew up on the res. A lot of non-native people grew up on the res. And because, you know, they may have somebody who married it, like their mom or dad married in. And so Charles, you know, grows up there. He has one good friend, and then he has Elizabeth, who he's friends with too, and you know they become a thing. And she ultimately carries. She ultimately gets pregnant when he's forced to leave the reservation when he turns 18 because he's not a citizen. You can't live on the reservation if you're not a citizen. I believe you can live on the reservation if you have inherited land passed down, and passed down. And what I'm talking about here is blood quantum. Now, I'm not sure how familiar people are with blood quantum, but it's the federal all federally recognized tribes have to keep a list of tribal citizens. And one of the most common way tribes keep track is blood quantum, and tribes are allowed to choose how they measure that blood quantum. So for Penobscot, you have to have at least 25% Penobscot blood to be considered a citizen of the tribe. And so Elizabeth was in the book, Elizabeth was only 25% and Charles was none. And Charles knew what it was like to not be, non-native, right? Non-native. Obviously Elizabeth is a descendant and would have different privileges than Charles had, but Elizabeth, Mary, and Charles kind of came to this decision that it was best if they lied and said that the child belonged to another man, so she can be considered an enrolled member. And it's just, blood quantum is just this colonial tool that's been used to wreak havoc, and it's just not a good system. It's not, and it creates a lot of problems. But that's the only thing I wanted to add to the synopsis, that part about blood quantum, for those who were unfamiliar. Do people have questions at all about that? Like for Penobscot, it's 25%. You have to be 25% to be considered a member of the tribe. I think the Cherokee, I think it's 164th. If you're 164th, you're considered Cherokee. And there's a census committee that they're always talking about, oh, okay, do we lower the blood quantum or higher the blood quantum? So like if they did lower it, then I would have more native blood in me, whatever that is, but then that opens up a plethora of issues, right? We think about all the federal funding tribes get based off of based off of citizenship and all of these things. So there's a lot of political elements at play there too that happen. But if nobody has any questions, I'll dive into this piece I wrote about that actually deals with blood quantum, and it was published in the Georgia Review in spring of 2020. I think that was when they did the census, right? The U.S. Census, I believe. And yeah, and the Georgia Review put together a special edition dedicated to the census, and a lot of people contributed, and they asked me to write an issue, and they asked me to write something for consideration, and I did, and they accepted it, and I was excited. They ran it as fiction, but I see this as very experimental nonfiction, because it's true, in a way. It's just I use a lot of different techniques in it. But so this is called, this is the citizenship question, we the people. The memory begins here. We're young, us Skijans, and we're somewhere on the reservation, the island. We could have been anywhere, but when we look back on it, we're in the woods alongside the dirt road that runs against the Penobscot River down to the graveyard, a dead end, unless you count the path at the end wide enough for a car to shoulder through, in which case it is not a dead end, but just a continuation to another part of this place. Again, we could have been anywhere, but we remember the sound of water crashing in the distance, the tumultuous noise as the brown river rose, crescendoed, smashed against rock, water spilling onto the shore like a bowl filled too high and set not gently on a table. It must have been spring when the ice on the river thawed, the bowl of our world filled too high. This is before we smoked, before we stole cigarettes, before we went down to the tribal offices and dug through the ashtrays, plucking salvageable butts and purifying the filters with flame, calling each other on house phones to whisper, "Found 3, let's meet up." And this is before we hid out in the woods late at night, past curfew, around a fire while we drank first one beer, stolen from an older brother or sister or mother or father, given by an older brother or sister or mother or father, and then a second and a third and a fourth, a 12-pack, a 24, a 30. And this too was before some of us went too deep, before some of us died from suicides, before some of us died from overdoses, alone in that back room, a slant of light, before some of us would keep on living, before some of us had children who one day will remember this, all of this memory, like it was them who had lived it in the before, down there in the woods along that dirt road that runs with, against the river on down to the graveyard. Out there in the woods, we are talking about being Indian. I'm more than you, one of us says, and you and you and you. Not you though, I don't think. How much you got? This is before we know better, before we know that some will never know better. This is before we, or some of us, know how vast the government's plan ran, how much it festered. This is before we knew these men, the so-called white fathers, had plans masked as survival, but were intended for us to eat each other's spirit piece by piece. This is before colonial construct is in our vocabulary. 85%, one of us repeats, 5 more than me. Nobody says anything else about it, but it's there, an itch we can't scratch, or an itch that doesn't yet need a scratch. But at home later, we feel it, that itch. And so we each go through the book. We all have one, or our parents do. It's a small book, held together with a black binding comb, the cover showing a traditional double curve, a drawing denoting the union of tribes, the Wabanaki, the people of the dawn. The pages, some dirty like the color of grease on a white cloth, are filled with a list of names organized alphabetically by family last name. Next to each name is a number, a percentage. We see ourselves, our union, blank percent, blank percent, blank percent, blank percent, and blank percent. The next day in the woods, one of us says, shit, blank is 100%? Holy poof. Blank doesn't even live here, lives over town. I don't even know who that is. His family's been on council forever. Something's not right. The river is still loud. Another day of spillage, of draining. One of us comes back to it. How could we not? I did the math. How'd you get 85%? I want to know. They just did, one of us responds. Who? The census committee. We say nothing. Your mom was on that, wasn't she? We don't know. It's suspect, more than one of us thinks. Not all of us, though. But all of us know that something is fractured. Or maybe it's just our memory of the river crashing on those slick rocks. No, because we can feel it. This breakage, each of us, a rupture. This is before we know how fractures work. That for one to occur, a force stronger than the object has to be applied. And while this is before we know what that force is, we've always known how to feel. We were born with that skill. That is our union. But do we know what was fractured? Do we know from which part the pain originated? Was it our memories, our egos, our sense of Panawapskawi, our knowing if we exist? Above all, is it this fracture that has unsettled us, that pushed us on our paths into the after? This is where we split, move apart. That day in the woods, each of us off in our own directions home. Again, the crashing of the river fading behind, but forever there in our memory. In the way back, an inner ear pressed to a shell, hearing. This is where some of us will learn to hate ourselves. This is where some of us will learn to love ourselves. But I wonder, a piece is splintered from that whole who remembers that day, that talk, that sound of the river's violent thrashing. Will I ever know, ever figure out if to belong here is to not belong, or if to not belong here is to belong? Thank you. So I guess they made it fiction because I used plural we, and I don't know, I guess I didn't really make anything up. I just it's nonfiction to me. I just see it as creative nonfiction with a little questionable artistic liberty. But thinking about this piece, this piece is in a way part of my novel Fire Exit, thinking about what it means to belong, thinking about what blood really is, right? Thinking about who we are, thinking about thinking about our differences and our similarities. For me, what is that? Using Google here for a second. I always forget the quote, but I love it. Like for me, I think that and this is how I work as a writer. The foundation of every story for me always begins with this, because it helps me be able to connect with readers better, or to help readers connect with the content better. We all come from different backgrounds, from different places, different races, ethnicities, all of those things. But the one common thing that is the same, that just goes across everything, is the fact that we can feel, that we all have emotion, right? And that's the key, I think, in storytelling, is any that emotion to build off of. Obviously, though, the emotion of happiness and sadness and anger and any others you want to throw out there, we respond to them differently because of colonialism, right? So yes, we all have that shared similarity in that we can all feel, right? But we all feel in different ways, right? And that's the difference, right? And this is the Audre Lorde quote. She goes, it is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And so Fire Exit, I'm hoping, is going to be be a book that does that tries to fulfill that notion, that tries to, maybe metaphorically do it. So yeah, it's always been something that's I've been deeply bothered by, seeing people, seeing Indigenous people who are, descendants, being treated differently because they're not on the census, for example, or seeing someone who is the descendant of a descendant, and being afraid, to, go to a social or a powwow or whatever you want to call it. So that's really what Fire Exit is about. I just read that piece and talking about that type of pain and what a lot of Native youth, I think, go through. Perhaps it's gotten better, perhaps it hasn't. I don't know, but I grew up in that way. But so yeah, that's Fire Exit. That's coming out, and on June 4th, 2024. It's available for pre-order. Who says you could pre-order 5 copies if you want, it's totally up to you. So I would say, yeah, 6, 7, that works as well. But yeah, I'd love to hand it off, open the floor to any questions at all.
And feel free to simply unmute yourself, and if you have a comment, if you have a question, if you don't want to write it into the chat, I would encourage everyone to take advantage of having Morgan here. We've got him for a little while longer.
I have a question.
Yay, great. Go for it.
Hello. My question is, what advice would you give, Native writers? Like, how would you encourage them to, continue to write in I guess, a Western style, the using the English language, but bringing in traditional oral, but still having that respect. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, Yeah, no, that makes total sense, and that's the thing I talk a lot about with, because I feel like a well there are well I'll put it this way. I think um my advice is always to never 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 perform for the white man. You know what I mean? We think about, what indigenous people have had to do, and not just indigenous people, but people who are a minority and, need to make money, for example, right? Like they have to sell themselves in some way. And that's been the case in literature as well. Native writers have had to write in a specific way for a white readership. It was Louis Owens he was a native writer and a native scholar, who he committed suicide years and years ago, but he had a quote that went something like, something along the lines of, non-native readers come to native literature expecting a colorful, comfortable tour of Indian country, and it's kind of true if you think about it. And I'm not here to badmouth any indigenous writer for what they choose to do, because if they are writing in a performative way, that's their choice, right? Maybe they need that money. You know what I mean? It's not their problem to fix. It's not our problem to fix. It's Western cultural publishing's problem to fix. If they're not going to fix it, they're going to just put the mirror back towards us and make it think it's our problem, right? When it's not. So my advice is to always, I am like deeply committed to like the craft of fiction writing, thinking deeply about character. What do characters want? What do they do to get it? And, it's throughout telling a story, I look for moments where I can seize an opportunity to drop elements of culture into it, because I don't want to put culture in. I want emotion to be there first, and then I want there to be culture. Because like I said, going back, like the foundation for me is always like feeling. If we can get the feeling, we're good. We're good to go. And then, what characters want. And then, you can, throw in, you might find some opportunities to throw in some cultural elements, right? And the other, so that's my advice. But then the other thing too is, don't, I feel like, no, I feel like minority writers just have to explain stuff all the time. It's like, it's like everybody has a phone. They know how to use Google, right? You can look it up. You can take a break from the book, right? I mean, our attention spans are, we can literally read a page before we're like, oh, I'm gonna go watch Netflix anyway. So it's like, use Google, look it up, figure it out. And it's, don't explain, just let the story be. Let the reader who connects with that. So there will be a reader who connects with that story. So that's the advice I always give to Indigenous writers is, focus on the craft. Don't explain things for the sake of lazy readers. And the last thing is don't quit. You can't quit. You have to keep going. You write a story and it doesn't work. Writers are always calling it a failed story. It's not a failed story. If I hadn't written so many failed stories, I wouldn't have written, something else that was, a product of that failed story. Like I wouldn't have been able to see it. So that's my advice. Is I always mispronounce this name. Alicia. Sorry.
It's pronounced Alicia, but yeah, everybody says Alicia.
Okay, Alicia. Thank you for that question. I hope I answered it well.
Yeah, thank you. And I was wondering, because I'm in the process of writing a little story myself, and I was wondering if I could kind of sneak it to you sometime.
Yeah,
give me
yeah.
some pointers. That would be really nice.
yeah, get in touch with Erica, and we can go from there. I think Erica has her work email somewhere online.
I'll
So
drop it into the chat for you.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I jump in? I wanted to say one of the things I loved about reading this book was how you did just walk us across the bridge and dropped us right in to this kind of complicated coming of age story with the assumption that we could figure it out. Like, this is find the humanity in this and take it where you are. And I just love that you didn't try to explain. You know, you walked us through your dialogue and through the storyline into a different experience, a different kind of coming of age. But the expectation was your story was strong enough to take us along with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Tricia, for saying that. And it's always good to hear that from people, because it's like, that's what I wanted to do. And I was so afraid. I was like, oh God, what if I didn't do it? Because you can never really, I think every writer, however, unless they're super narcissistic, looks at their work as not being very good, and not doing what they want to do with it. So thank you. And I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And there's one more question in the chat if you have.
Oh, there is. I didn't see it.
It just popped up.
I don't see it.
I can read it. It says substance abuse or abuse was a continuing theme in the book. What do you, whoops, I've lost it now. What do you think of the treatment plans and programs that have been developed, especially in regards to the Native population?
It depends. It depends. Tribe by tribe. I think it's getting better. But I think the treatment plans are getting better, but because a lot of those treatment plans are becoming sort of like a mix between modern medicine and also traditional ways of healing. And one example is, I hope I'm getting this right, but the Dene Nation, or the Navajo Nation, they have this. So every tribe has its own. Every tribe is a sovereign nation. It's a domestic dependent nation, and so they have their own sovereignty, and they have their own judicial system. They have their own court system. Obviously, it's obviously there are restrictions, because the U.S. is obviously not going to give tribes all of their power, and they've been slowly taking it away over the course of forever. But somewhere in the Navajo Nation, they use some kind of program where I really don't know the logistics of it, but it's really successful. There are I don't know how it works exactly, but it's like a mix of traditional medicine as well as traditional medicine and modern medicine. And what's funny is there's a lot of non-natives actually choose to go to that program because they don't want to go to jail. And they come out and they actually are not, I mean, they're once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic, but they're not drinking, they're sober, and they've remained sober. And so there are really like successful programs out there that people have figured out. But I think the whole treatment of drug and alcohol addiction and trauma is something we haven't figured out yet, really, how to treat. I don't, it's, I'm just going to say blame capitalism, really, for that. But the Penobscot Nation, for example, has a a unique drug counseling program, which again, I don't know too much about the specifics of how they run it. But it is, again, it's a mix of, traditional medicine along with community support, and along with, traditional, it could be sweats, it could be ceremonies, those types of things. The big thing is community, though. Like, that is like the big thing. Too many people who are addicts just get tossed away, and it's like it's like we think that there's like a limit on how many times you can screw up, but that's not true, and I don't know if that really answers your question. I'm just sort of rambling here because it irritates me. But some nations don't have it that great, indigenous nations, while others do have it a bit better. I mean, because they have the funds and they actually have the resources, right? Like, you think like the Seminole tribe in Florida, like they make a lot of money. I went to school so we get so indigenous people get per capitas, and so apparently per capitas it's money that gets sent out to everybody from like tribal investments, so it's shared money. And for us, we get it once a month, and like it's not a lot of money. It's like maybe like $600 or something, but it's Christmas shopping money around this time. And I went to school at Dartmouth College with this kid who was Seminole, and he was from that tribe. And I just about flew out of my shoes when he told me what his per capita was. It was something like $60,000 he got a year. Like, that's how much money their tribe brought in. So and then you think about Pine Ridge, which has like no money, like there's nothing there. And so there's just a complete imbalance across Indian country when it comes to funding, not necessarily from the federal government itself, but from how those tribes are able to, make money by using the resources available to them. And so it's a matter, it really depends, tribe by tribe. But I think, yeah, I don't know. There's 574 federally recognized tribes, and then there's tons that are state recognized only, and then there are some that are unrecognized. And it's like, I don't know. I listed like 4 examples out of all of those. So who knows? It could be really bad, or it could be really good. But I'm an optimistic person, so I like to think it's getting better.
Any last questions, comments before we let Morgan go?
Sure. Okay, I have to admit I haven't read it yet, but I knew of it from somebody that has read it, and so I'll go in that direction. But one thing I was really curious about when listening to you during this session, would you say your greater influence is sort of like the stories that surrounded you when you were growing up, because you had sort of these influences that it sounds like they're definitely manifested in the book, or you kind of talked about how emotion and capturing that is one of the greatest pieces for you. So do you work from that perspective of, I want to convey this concept and then I'm going to pull in my background and stories to bring it about? Or is it more the fact that you're bringing up the stories first and then working in some emotion to go with them? I'm not sure I quite nailed that, but
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah, so I grew up in an environment where education wasn't necessarily like a priority. It wasn't something I really cared about because of things at home, problems at home and stuff. And so I did poorly in school. I wouldn't have graduated high school without the help of so many teachers there who bust their ass every single day and get paid shit to help people like me, graduate. And so But while I didn't go to, I think I missed like 60 days of school like one year. I don't know like how they let me like just go on. I don't know what happened, but anyways, I just grew up surrounded by stories, just like storytelling. When I went to school up until 8th grade on the Penobscot Nation, and we had Native American Studies class, and that was with John Bear Mitchell, who teaches at the University of Maine now, and he's a fantastic storyteller. So we grew up hearing stories of Buscabe and Woodjelson, and all these traditional stories. But I always loved telling stories. I growing, like me and my friends, when we were younger, and as we got older and we hung out more out, when we were like 14, and smoking cigarettes out in the woods, or just doing stuff we weren't supposed to be doing. I was the one who was sort of like, I was the story keeper, I suppose, and I'd always get us going with telling stories, and like oh, you guys remember this, and and diving into it and that sort of thing. And I always loved it. And when I went to college, when I went to the EMCC.
Is. Oh, okay. Oh, wait a minute.
And I went to EMCC, which is really the only college that accepted me. I started reading literature, and I recognized in literature the fact that there were components to the very thing I loved, which was the oral storytelling part, which was the emotion, which is sitting around and having a good time and feeling good or sad or whatnot. And it was just then that I just started reading and reading and reading and studying and like looking at how books worked, right? And so I come from an oral storytelling background, I suppose. Like that's like where I think I like get most of my motivation. And I use Western fiction as a means to tell these stories as best I can. I will say one final thing, and I didn't know this at all, but I went to one of my first events was for the Portland Public Library. They did it at a brewery though, because of COVID. It was like out. There was just much more room outside and everything. And I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with a person by the name of Connor Quinn. He teaches at the University of Southern Maine, I believe, but he's a linguist, and he in the late 90s maybe came to the tribe, and he worked with elders to preserve the language. He created an alphabet system, and he did like all of this. He did all of this work, and so I mean, and he worked, and yeah, he's just a great person. But me and him got to talk, and he went to another event I did, and we were talking there again, and he was like, you know what? He was like, the way you write is very. He was like, when you were reading, I was translating it into Penobscot into my head, and he was like, so it was interesting. So like, I suppose the way we speak in English, or the way I grew up speaking English, was the way somewhere along the line, our language, even though it died out, like our syntax and diction kind of stayed the same, and so my voice is in that way. And he was like, you could easily translate these stories into Penobscot. And I thought that was really cool to think about, just to think about how language and how we choose to order words can have that presence of the way an older, almost distinct language functioned, right? But yeah, for me it was starting with oral storytelling, and then just being like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I'll just continue. I'll see if I'll tell stories. If I knew how hard it would be, I probably would have done something else, maybe, I don't know, but no, I don't know. I couldn't sit at a desk. No, well, I literally sit at a desk to write. I couldn't do like a 9-to-5 job. Like that would, I just couldn't, like, I just loved storytelling too much. And so I just chased after it. And I put in as much work as I could. And I had so much help from so many people. And there was, you know, luck, a little bit of luck there, I think too, that helped as well. Which isn't everything, but it, you know, I just worked really hard at it. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
I think it does. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So yeah, I think we were at 7:30, at least that's what mine says.
7:29. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and mostly thank you, Morgan, for taking time out of your evening and not putting your son to bed.
Yeah, I don't hear any
didn't hear him
screaming right
screaming.
now.
He said he
So
was crying. I didn't hear him. But thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and have a wonderful night.
thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.